This is the unrestricted free agent.
The Jimbo Fisher stuff. Were you in the room the other day when he threw?
Was. Part of the reason we had so much fun being Clemson was because we used to talk a lot of shit to them and they couldn't handle it.
You feel fine, but your hands are shaking.
Coach Spurrier couldn't give a damn.
I want to take these athletes and mentor them.
Why can't the Gamecocks win at the SEC tournament?
So sunny all the time, so hot.
Too sunny.
Too sunny.
Fans are going to be fans, and people who understand the sport are going to talk sports.
With some weird dynamics.
It's going to be painful, but I think at the end of the day, we'll be stronger people for it.
Get it going on a Monday morning. Welcome in. How's the audio sounding this morning? We on track? Are we muffled? Are we underwater? Is the equipment getting along with me this morning? My kids got along with me this morning. Asking the audio to work right off the top. That might be too much. But a bunch of you guys are already in, so I'm hopeful. I'm optimistic. It's August 22nd. We're that much closer to football season. Why wouldn't I be hopeful? Oh, we're getting thumbs up all over the place. Thanks, guys. DC in first this morning. Roger. Kins, how about that? Kins is pumped up. That's not a good morning. That is a good morning. Going Robin Williams on me right there. Kirby, happy Monday to you as well, sir. Craig, good to see you in here, guys. All right. Oh, Josh, I know the feeling. He says, my kids were jerks this morning. And it's today has been the best one we've had. So if I'm gonna get on here and complain about the bad ones, I got to tell you about the good ones too. I'm just glad there is a good one to tell you about. I don't know the difference. I was like, I was talking to my wife about it. How can we make this happen again? She's like, I don't know. Might have just gotten lucky. And as I'm hearing my voice too, it's sounding a little used. Might have to do with a bunch of practices over the weekend. So that's my theory, that we wore them out over the weekend. They were sleeping. They were ready to start again. At least I'm hoping that's the case. What about you guys? How was the weekend? You guys saw this, right? This is the best news of the morning by far. Last weekend without college football until December. And I'm not quite sure. I think I saw maybe even a January in there as well, because December works out weird. Usually that first weekend, conference championship games, then the Army-Navy game, I think, the next weekend, and then I think we get bowl games. So, and then, of course, you got the NFL going on to December as well. So, really, the last weekend without real football, regular season or playoff football through mid-February, right? I guess maybe the week before the Super Bowl. Oh. DC, well done, sir. My wife and kids all go to the same school. No problem for me. Yeah, and this is the week. DC saying he thinks Carolina Call starts Thursday night. If you were looking for Shane Beamer and his reaction from the last scrimmage number 2 on Saturday, you couldn't find it. He didn't say anything. There's no public comments there, but I think it was all, the plan is to basically make this week a dress rehearsal, as I understand it, for next week's game week. So that means the weekly press conference that Shane Beamer will have during the season to preview the next opponent will typically be on Tuesdays at 1:30. You're getting one of those this week. You're getting the coordinator's press conference, weekly press conference on Wednesday at 12:30. That's another great sign. And a smart way to do it too. It may be necessary last year with Shane Beamer being in year number 1. You don't want to go through that week for the first time during game week number 1. So that made sense. But it also makes sense to do it again. Why not? Right? Why not get that routine started? And that's exactly what they're doing for Gamecock football, which had another big-time commit over the weekend might have had you excited. If you went to a Gamecock Central party, maybe you had a chance, you had an opportunity to get an autograph, maybe exchange a few words with some big Gamecock athletes, including G.G. Jackson at the top of the list, and everything I saw social media-wise, speaking highly of him. Roger says his weekend uneventful, which actually might be a good thing. Yeah, that's never a bad thing, for sure. Chris, on the Facebook live stream. Good to see Chris this morning. 12 days. 12 days until the Gamecock football season kicks off. We get a few Thursday night games on September 1st before September 3rd. So we're good to go. Let's get to the headline of the weekend by far from the Gamecock football standpoint. 4-star defensive lineman from Macon, Georgia, Zavion Hardy, adds another 4-star defensive lineman to the class of 2023. Another positive recruiting headline for Shane Beamer and company. This is coming off of, last Thursday's commitment from the big Camden defensive lineman, Xavier McLeod. So Zavion Hardy adding another one there. And there are still other 4 stars, a 5-star guy that's set an official visit to Carolina as well. Moving up to number 17 is what I saw in the On3 consensus rankings. I've seen it as high as number 16 in the country. And then I've also seen the stat that Carolina hasn't finished in the top 15 in recruiting, maybe since back in 2013, somewhere in there. Now, my question, even as I'm saying all of that, the back of my brain is trying to tell my mouth, whoa, whoa, whoa. Easy, big fella. Off the brakes. It's August. It's easy to get carried away a little bit when you stack 4-star on top of 4-star. I believe this is number 9, maybe number 10 even, from a 4-star from a total commitment standpoint. Let me give you the numbers. First of all, I was a little bit surprised to see just how big Hardy is, 6'5", 260. Now, that's not even close to how big Xavier McLeod is, but I think they're different type players. I think Hardy may be more on the outside. I'm not sure. When you're 260 in high school, I think you probably, and you're 6'5", you probably could grow into an interior defensive lineman. But I believe Hardy thought to be more of an outside guy. And this was not a surprise. I'm looking at the percentages here on the On3 page, 91.5% chance to go to South Carolina, Florida. The next one at 6% chance. But still a big-time prospect. Pledging his commitment to Carolina, always a good thing. He's actually the second highest-rated guy in the class, just above Xavier McLeod, just behind the big offensive lineman, Marquis Anderson from Dorm. So something to keep an eye on, to keep in mind, to be optimistic about for sure. The question, I think, for Gamecock fans, exactly how optimistic. Greg says, drove up for the kickoff party Saturday. He's talking about the Gamecock Central big kickoff party, I believe, at Still Hands Brewery. McLeod was there hanging out. Big dude. Needs Luke Day, but he's got the frame. And good to meet Wes Mitchell, Chris Clark, Pearson Fowler. Yeah, all Wes and Chris, specifically with Gamecock Central, that is. Pearson Fowler knows those guys well, and I think is still doing, or has done, I know in the past, a bunch of podcast work with them and worked with them at the radio. Over at 107.5 The Game. 6'5", 260 is a big dude, Chris says. Yeah, not nearly as big as what, I think 6'6", 324 or something like that is what McLeod's listed out. And that's why Greg mentioned the strength coach in Luke Day. He has a total of 19. I think you're right. Let me go to these national rankings here. We'll break it down on the On3 deal. They break it down into exactly how many guys are committed, how many 4-star, 3-star, 5-star guys. Carolina at number 17. Yeah, 9 4-star guys, 10 3-star guys of the 19 commitments. Just to give you some reference. Let's see, the numbers, trying to give you the low number. Everybody's got a bunch of commitments right now. It has been very busy in the last 6 weeks, as this is where we are in the modern day recruiting cycle, with having the option, and most players doing it in December now instead of February. If you're not making your commitment before your high school senior season, you are the anomaly. And it probably means you are an absolute upper echelon player, or you're on the other end of that spectrum, under the radar. Because a lot of these middle guys, not even middle guys, just really good players, the theory is you want to take your spot while you've got a spot. That's how I understand it anyway. 14 is the lowest amount of class. 13, I guess, is right behind Carolina. Michigan State has 13. Florida State with 14. They're right behind Carolina in the national rankings, according to On3. Louisville is a few spots ahead of them at 14. They've got a 5-star guy, 7 4-stars, 6 3-star guys. And then it gets all the way, gets into the 20s pretty quick. Arkansas is right in front of Carolina with 23 commits in a class of 2023. But Arkansas, Tennessee, 16 and 13 respectively in the national rankings. A couple of SEC programs that I guess Carolina could conceivably pass. They're 17th in the country right now, but 7th in the SEC. What it is, right? Always is. So the hashtag trenches has been floating around for sure as it pertains to the recruiting news. Roger says, I like getting all these linemen. I'm of the belief you can never have enough. Well, certainly you can never have enough talented guys. And Greg, I think it was you the other day that mentioned how Mark Stoops, when we're having the fun Mark Stoops conversation there, stupid glasses, about how they've done it. Kentucky has been able to make themselves relevant in SEC football largely through the lines of scrimmage. 9 4-stars, Greg's pointing out. Pretty impressive stuff for the Gamecock class of 2023. But 6 of 8 guys on the line, so 8 linemen, I think, on the offensive or defensive side of the ball out of the 19 guys, and 6 of them are 4-star guys. So 6 of the 9 4-stars, I believe, on the offensive or defensive line. Drake says he's looking ahead, smart. If you include Oklahoma and Texas, we're still 10th in the SEC, but Shane's doing better than I thought he would in year 2. So what about you? I think that's the point here, right? And if you're a Clemson fan and you're looking in, you're saying, oh, these guys don't even compare to Clemson and the whole thing. Yeah, Carolina's perspective for several years now has not included the in-state rivalry. Couldn't. It's just facts, right? There's a long way to go to start looking over in the upstate and comparing your program to that program. A long way to go. So Carolina fans certainly don't want to hear that. Clemson fans, you can be happy with that. And if you have to keep saying it, then well, that says a lot about you. But that is the point, I think. What did you think? What did you expect? Where did you expect the Gamecock football program to be? The program to be August 22nd, 2022, in year number 2 of Shane Beamer. Not light years ahead of where I thought it would be, but definitely way ahead of where I thought it would be right now. If you talked to me this time last year. I mean, Spencer Rattler as your quarterback, having won 7 games, including wins over Florida, Auburn, and North Carolina, up to right around top 15, inside of top 20 in the country in recruiting, with especially with linemen kind of leading the way there. It's the recipe, right? I mean, it's a near dream scenario. Now, maybe you would rather have, I mean, if you're going to go this time last year and say absolutely pie in the sky stuff, well, you got Arch Manning as your quarterback already committed and ready to go. I don't even know where else you go besides some ridiculous scenario, but it's pretty close, man. Now, Craig's talking about a couple of other guys, and he says if those other guys end up signing, then it's an A-plus class for Beamer. I think it's already really close, right? It's already at an A level. And yes, some of the rankings will change by the end of the high school season. Not really sure how all that works, DC says. Well, DC, that just means you're being honest. No one's real sure. No one's exactly sure how all of that works. How the exact player rankings go up and down. I mean, it's one of the craziest things in sports, right? You rank guys specifically, like Zavion Hardy, the guy who committed yesterday from Macon, Georgia, defensive lineman, is ranked as high as I think 146th in the country. He's outside of the top 200 in ESPN. I think has him ranked 210th. Now, how is a defensive lineman at 210 right behind a wide receiver at 209 or running back or quarterback? It's kind of crazy. But I get why they do it. We eat it up. Here I am talking about it. So I should not. And Chris, I think this is another one that's up in the air. Total number of commitments a team can have. It has been capped at 25. Here recently, there is a bunch of talk of that number getting thrown out the window with unlimited transfers being talked about and expected. The transfer portal is wild. That number was put into place because I think it was Houston Nutt at Ole Miss at the time who became kind of infamous for signing like 35, 40 guys and basically bringing an entire new haul in every year. And anybody who didn't live up to their end of the bargain or typically would be encouraged to move on, they were basically just cut, right? If you weren't going to help that team win to the level they needed you to, cut after a year. Now, and in response to that, you've seen places like the University of South Carolina offer guaranteed 4-year scholarships, saying that's part of their deal. They're not going to do that, but we all know these conversations still happen. Exit interviews after every season where coaches have very frank discussions with players about the outlook for their future in that specific program all over the country. Every program, every sport happens all the time. So I think, actually, you guys tell me this. Go the other way. I don't know how you can see it other than Shane Beamer way ahead of schedule as we sit here August 22nd, 2022. I guess maybe if you had massive expectations, you would say, no, he's right on track or doing exactly what I thought he would do. Or, I mean, the track record is there with recruiting, no doubt about it. But I think most of us do remember some of those games that were less than impressive last year. Barely beating Vanderbilt. 9-point win at home against Troy. Surviving at East Carolina. There's also the massive win against Florida, Auburn, and North Carolina on the other side of those things. Then you could talk about the losses as well that were pretty uncompetitive. Roger, I'm with you. I don't follow it closely. Recruiting he's talking about. I don't really get into the star rankings, but I do recognize the schools Carolina's competing against in these commitments, beating out some good teams in most of them. And I think that's the wise way to check out recruiting. And most of the time, that'll take you exactly to rankings or really getting in the weeds, right? If a school like Florida or Georgia, Michigan, kind of fill in the blank, those type programs, if you're after those same guys, you beat out those other programs, you're doing well in college football recruiting. Take all stars or rankings, numbers with decimal points. These guys are ranked on a scale of 100, I guess, and that's how you get the average rank for each recruit. And I think that's ultimately how they rank these classes in the country, right? Which one has the highest average rating per commitment. In Carolina right now, number 17. I don't know how you can see that other than way ahead of schedule. Now the question, we talked about it on a Friday, and it has been the topic of discussion, I think, mainly this offseason for Carolina, what's a fair expectation? What's a successful season in 2022? Man, I keep seeing these things on social media, and I keep shaking my head. 8-4, 9-3. Josh Pate does the late kick show there for CBS Sports. I saw some of you reacting to him. He had the ceiling at 9-3, which I think is very fair. A lot of you saying, well, yeah, maybe that. What if Spencer? I saw one specific. What if Spencer Rattler plays well? I think they can do a lot better than that. A lot better than 9-3. The team that had won 6 games combined a couple of years ago, the last 2 years going into the last season. Maybe. But this is where our conversations can become a little bit too echo chamberish, too tunnel vision every single year in South Carolina, probably around every single college football program, right? You're day in and day out, you're focused on what's going on at your practice or your preseason scrimmage, what's happening with your recruiting. You gotta zoom out a little bit, man. No, Chris, absolutely not. It's not surprising to see how good of a recruiter Shane Beamer is. He says, not really for me. Absolutely not. He couldn't have got the job. Not even a candidate to get the job if he had not had a proven track record as an elite college football recruiter. But that was the exact resume of the last guy who had the job. Elite college football recruiter, Will Muschamp. And not enough in major college football to just have that on your resume typically. Now, there are guys out there that have that more than coordinator experience. Popped to mind. Ed Orgeron popped to mind. He's known as a great recruiter. Sam Pittman, I think that's how he got the Arkansas job, largely based on that. His experience and clearly the fit. Same with Orgeron at LSU, even Ole Miss. So, not really surprising, but I think just ahead of schedule. Because had you lost any of those games that I mentioned, that you easily could have lost last year, Vandy, Troy, East Carolina, I'm not sure that you can sell what you're selling quite as well to 4-star guys in the class of 2023. Yeah, DC, I think that's a very fair statement. We don't have the depth for 9 to 12 win seasons right now. Anthony, good to hear from you, sir. Good morning, UFAs. Running a little late this morning. We'll let it slide this time because of your track record. And that's where you can get a little bit ahead of yourself this time of year. I think every program does, and it's part of the fun, right? But just to know everything it requires week in, week out in the SEC specifically to stack wins on top of wins. And last year was kind of crazy, right? It was the win-loss pattern. Win one, lose one. That's just kind of how it went. So in a way, you don't let any kind of negative momentum roll. That's a good thing. But also you don't get rolled on the positive side, not what you're looking for necessarily. You got to have guys behind guys behind guys if you're going to be one of the best teams in the SEC. I think Carolina is going to be improved. I don't know what that means from the record standpoint. I'm on the record as saying 7-5 is what I think it'll end up in 2023. I think it's the most fair, reasonable, logical way that I can go through that schedule. Game 1 through 12. Now, having done that, I think I went 6-6 last year, maybe 5. I think I might have gone 5-7 last year. So I underestimated it clearly. But when I look at South Carolina's program versus other programs, Arkansas, Kentucky, Tennessee, Florida, Missouri. Oh, those are real close. All of those are real close. I'd say Arkansas going to be the most difficult game of that bunch. Tennessee, based on last year's matchup, got to be right there as well. But having Tennessee come to Carolina this year, that Kentucky game is so fascinating. You guys see Mark Stoops going back on his comments. I'm not buying it. What about you guys? I guess the majority of me is not buying. I think even if it was a subconscious thing, Mark Stoops back at SEC Media Days, having seen that video, I'm sure, or heard people talk about it, or maybe even asked about it a few times, it was somewhere in the back of his mind, and it slipped out a little bit. And now he's going back on it. He said, no, I was just talking about me and how I was doing things. Okay. So Chris is right there with the 7-5 prediction, 6-6 last year. What Chris said. So you nailed it last year, Chris. But that's the thing. When I break down the schedule, I typically do, all right, what do you feel most confident about from a wins and losses standpoint? And then how many do you have in the middle? How many are 60-40 or closer? There are a bunch of those games this year. Off the top of my head, Florida, Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri. Those are the main ones, right? I mean, I can understand if a Vanderbilt fan threw that in there based off of last year's game. That would be fair from the Vandy perspective. From the Carolina perspective, I think it's fair to keep it out of there and throw that in the. Well, those are the 4 wins you're counting on: Georgia State, Vandy, SC State, and Charlotte. Counting on those 4 wins. Those need to happen. If you're going the other side, you're certainly going Georgia. Most likely not. I get it. You want to see the upset on September 17th, noon, Williams-Brice Stadium. It's possible. Knowing that it happened 3 years ago in Athens, anything's possible, right? Still mystified by that. One of the craziest games of all time. Craziest outcomes. I think if you're being reasonable and logical, you got to put Clemson and Texas A&M in that category as well. Never beaten Texas A&M. Clemson game has not been competitive. So you got 4 and 3 right there. Do the math. That's 5 toss-up games. Did I give you 5? Tennessee, Florida. The Arkansas game I didn't throw in there earlier, right? Kentucky, Missouri, Arkansas. 5. Yeah, I think a lot of people would put Arkansas in that probably going to lose category. But I get it if you want to be open-minded there. So that's almost breaking that thing down into 4s. If we go really strong opinion, right? If I want to go my national pundit impersonation, they're absolutely going to win 4 games. They're absolutely not going to win 4 games, and then they're 4 in the middle. So if you look at it that way, then 7-5 would actually be pretty good. You win 3 out of those 4 in the middle. Not quite that strong. I know college football is just too goofy. I'm not going to be shocked if Carolina doesn't win all 4 of the ones that I put in the definitely going to win. I'm certainly not going to be shocked if they pull a win out of those 4 likely losses category. And what do you do in the middle? That's typically what Carolina season is, right? Outside of the heyday of Steve Spurrier, outside of the opposite of that, the last couple of years of Will Muschamp, it typically is, all right, what about against the middle of the pack in the SEC? And this year, if you want to go even more optimistic from a Carolina standpoint, the SEC East is about as down nationally outside of Georgia as it has been. Go back to, was that the 2016 season for Will Muschamp? Going 9-4, but then zooming out, seeing it later, even seeing it at the time, maybe taking advantage of programs who were down that year in the SEC East. Florida, Tennessee, specifically. 7-5, Roger says, would be my prediction. Kind of hate to look at it this way, but the losses will be much more competitive games than 2021. Yeah, nobody likes to say that or feel that maybe. No one's into moral victories. I've never heard anybody who's like, yeah, I love it. Just want to be close. That's good enough for me. No one's really into that. But from a program building standpoint, from a feel good about the direction things are going, a confidence that things are headed in the right direction, it's got to be what it is. I understand, too, if you say, no, you just play to win the game. If you can't win the game, then why does it matter? There's some of that, too. And there's definitely some of that, hey, I would rather get blown out than have my guts ripped out at the end and lose. It's a lot easier to handle. But from a program building standpoint, and that's where South Carolina still is, I think next year is when you can start to move on from that. Next year, I think you do move on from that because we're seeing now 2 complete off seasons for Shane Beamer about to get wrapped up here. And if you want to call the off season a few months after this season as well, we'll have seen it wrapped up. I think you get a couple of years through those, and you have a real good idea of what your program is. Trying to go back now. Yeah, I think we knew what it was under Will Muschamp. It was patterned after Nick Saban. It was blue-collar mentality. And it was not different than the other SEC programs Will Muschamp had been at. I mean, he said it, basically, right? He had not differentiated Carolina from any other programs he'd been before. Shane Beamer's the exact opposite, right? Almost an immediate differentiation at Carolina. A different voice, a unique response he's getting, not just from his own fan base, but outside of that as well. Other people who follow college football see and are noticing how things are different at South Carolina than at a lot of other programs. In a good way. All right, Anthony, anytime you quote the great Gamecock Larry, he says in the words of Gamecock Larry, 12-0 until proven otherwise. Realistically, I feel an 8-4 season at the least this year. Whoa. Realistically, Anthony, that's what you think? Or optimistically? I would change that word. Because that would mean wins. If I'm going back to how I went through that 12-game schedule, Clemson, Texas A&M, Georgia. What else did I have in there? I have Arkansas too. I think that was fair. Got that at 4. And then you're beating all those other teams, Florida, Tennessee, Missouri, Kentucky. Winning all of those? Love it, Anthony. Love the faith in the boys this year. I got my faith in the boys. And Chris, I think it's fair. Maybe you knock off one of those teams. Maybe this is the year Carolina beats Texas A&M, although nothing on the field has shown me, has given reason to back that up. Legitimate. I know people, Gamecock fans, predicting wins against Clemson and closing the gap and the whole thing, but I haven't seen that thing competitive. And if it couldn't be competitive last year, I think that was the year to sneak up and get Clemson. And clearly, I wasn't even close for Carolina. So it's hard for me to get to those numbers. I'm not trying to steal your joy. It'll be fun for sure. So interesting stuff. Wanted to take a quick break here. Give you a little bit of some of the best of. It's going to be really quick, by the way. That best of is probably the wrong way to put that. Recently had Coach Ball game on the show last weekend. or last weekend. Last week, Coach Ballgame is coming to Columbia. 1 week from yesterday, I guess that would be the 28th. He's going to be putting on what he calls a sandlot for young baseball players out there. Good thing for parents to listen to as well. Just trying to teach character through the game of baseball. I'm all about that. Wanted to let you hear that. He's coming up in my neck of the woods, TKK, South Carolina, a week from today. So trying to help him get the word out. You can go to coachballgame.com to get more information on there. But really interesting guy as well, entertaining guest to have on the show. And if you haven't seen his interview or seen him at all, I encourage you to go check him out on the YouTube page. Coach Ballgame is what he goes by. We'll get right back into football talk right after this here on Tim Hill, Unrestricted Free Agent.
I can connect with every coach out there. I started as a really bad one. I was a bad youth coach. I was all about performance and wean out the non-elite player, and I would be passive aggressive and negative and try and win at all costs. And I was a guy that played through college. I had been there, done that, and here I am still coaching the wrong way. So I get it. I was trying to do it the right way, but it took some mentors to say, why don't you just put your arm around this kid and ask him, what's going on at home? How are you? How are you doing? How's your mental health? And start there. And man, just changed my whole way of thinking.
Coach Ballgame, really appreciate it. And I know you've helped us today. You're helping the game of baseball. You're helping kids everywhere. Again, you can go to @Coach Ballgame all over the social media. You can sign up on coachballgame.com to come out to the Sandlots, Columbia and TKK coming up on the 28th and 29th.
Almost perfect timing, and the garage just hit. And that might have been getting the car out of my garage. Maybe. You guys out there can fill in your own blanks, come up with your own theories. But looking forward to watching kids react to Coach Ballgame. I think that's going to be the most fun part for me, and being able to coach my kids right now in youth baseball, flag football, basketball, the whole thing. That's the part. That's the whole point, right? That's the whole point of all this, right? That's why we're talking about it. That's why Anthony's pumped up. He's got faith in his boys. They bring him joy. Sports brings us joy. That's why I'm talking to you about it right now. Brings me joy to talk about it. That Find Some Joy comment that Shane Beamer made back in the day. I think that was just on social media when the first time I saw it. From an article about Dennis Dodd talking about the mayonnaise bowl, the Duke's Mayo Bowl, just being kind of a sideshow. And it was a curmudgeonly take that, I mean, realistically, it was fair. It was a fair take at the time, just talking about that was kind of ridiculous. And a bit of it had a kind of like a sideshow circusy feel. But from Shane Beamer's standpoint, I totally got where he's coming from. And obviously, everybody resonates with that. Find some joy, man. Probably several times a day I hear things, and in my head I think, man, I need to find some joy. Roger in. With Beamer looked at it as different because of the time he put in here before, that helps him now. I think you're talking about where the program is right now. Well, that's not even in the conversation to me. Of course, whoever had taken the job is going to look at the trajectory of the program different than those of us from the outside. You don't put any ceiling on it, and you want to go as quickly and as efficiently, as strongly as possible. And that's all you can think about every single day. That's it. You don't think about, what's reasonable and what's fair. No, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't factor into their process at all. But from those of us looking on it from the outside in, I think that's the only fair way to do it. That's just how I approach things. So yeah, of course. I mean, that would be a find some joy kind of way. Like if you brought that into the building with Shane Beamer on his staff and be like, guys, I don't think it's fair to try to go after these 4-star guys or a 5-star guy. It's probably not fair that we expect that they come to our program. Like, what are you talking about? Get out of here, man. You're done. But just trying to evaluate this thing, again, from a zoomed out view, I think that's how we got to look at it. Or that's how I feel like I need to look at it in a responsible way. And then if you want to take all of that, if you're at that place, and it sounds like Anthony is, if you're at that place emotionally where you can handle being disappointed if Carolina does not go 8-4, I think that might be the best thing that Shane Beamer has brought to Gamecock football. And it's a near miracle that he's done it in August 2022. A near miracle based on where the program was. Because it was as depressing as I've seen it, and I saw 21 losses in a row at the end of my college career at the University of South Carolina. I saw Lou Holtz, whose name meant even more in 1999, when he took the job, than it does here almost 25 years later. He was, 10 years removed from a national championship at Notre Dame? And Notre Dame, in the era of network television, early cable television, I guess that's still not early cable television, pre-internet video, where Notre Dame had was on such a pedestal. They were so different than everybody else. You could watch Notre Dame every single week. No other program, I think, back in 1999, you could do that. Very few. You had to go pay-per-view to do that for any other program, I believe, still done. Pay-per-view college football. That sounds crazy now, even though that's still kind of what we're doing. If you got to sign up for the SEC network to get Carolina games. And it looks like it's going to be a plus situation here soon. I mean, it has been a plus situation in years past. Chris, Facebook Live. Beamer was a part of those wonderful years we had, so he has seen firsthand that you could win at Carolina. Yeah, no doubt. But seeing it and then replicating it, or having the ability to replicate what Steve Spurrier did, those are completely different things, right? And especially doing it as a first-time head coach as opposed to a six-time SEC champion, a national champion head coach like Spurrier had on the resume. Completely different thing. And that's a great point, Anthony. 7-6 with 4 different quarterbacks last year. Again, and Rick Sanford was really harping on this when he joined the show not too long ago, and Rick is going to be kind enough to join us consistently during this upcoming football season. As the first round draft pick from Gamecock football, his opinion holds a lot of weight with me, but he said it a bunch when I talked to him, and he said he told Shane Beamer that, how did you win those games without a quarterback? And that's what 4 different quarterbacks means, right? You didn't have a quarterback, if we're talking frankly, right? Rick doesn't mean any disrespect to any of those guys, but you didn't have a legit good college quarterback last year. Gamecock football, it didn't exist. And that's what Anthony is pointing out in a positive way, I think. You got to give the coaching staff a bunch of credit for that, as opposed to knocking them for that in year 1. Now, if it's year even 2 and on down the line, then while you're giving a coaching staff credit for that, you're also taking away points because you're in charge of the groceries as well. You never go to a restaurant and say, I was really impressed that they made these bad ingredients taste as good as they did. That this subpar meat actually wasn't as bad as I thought. Yeah, held it together with baling wires, Hal Rogers putting it. Just starting to replicate it. He's on his way, Chris says. Yeah, and that's the only fair expectation of Shane Beamer is you don't expect that to happen immediately for sure. I mean, if you were around Gamecock football during the mid 2000s, you saw firsthand just how difficult it is, even for Steve Spurrier, to build Carolina into a winner. So difficult. Well, Daddy-O, I love this. The sports mainstream media, is that what MSM means? I don't know what else to go with there. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Still doesn't get it. Daddy-O says they believe the stern Saban way of doing things is the only way. You think the mainstream media believes this? Beamer knows social media outlets are the mainstream media to kids today. Kids do not watch TV. I don't think that's I think you might be getting too much news talk here or political rants on us there, Daddy-O. Mainstream media, I mean, I have never heard anyone not sing the praises of Justin King and the job that he's done at Carolina with their creative team, their social media team. And most of that coming from the mainstream media, or a lot of it is for sure. I mean, I don't even get that. What is the sports mainstream media? That ESPN? They're all over the digital outlets now, all over the social stuff too. Yeah, no one. I think you can go even further than that, Daddy-O. Very few people watch TV now. Live television numbers are awful. Unless it's a sporting event, they pretty much don't exist. Everybody's fractured. We're all on our own playlists. I'm going to cross over to an audio reference. Anthony's saying, yeah, definitely in a positive way. He sees that quarterback stat. So I don't think that's a mainstream media thing. I think that was, if you're going to cast blame on kind of the Saban model, you got to go to athletic directors across the SEC. Anyone who thought at Tennessee, at South Carolina, at, let's see, where are other, Georgia, even to a certain degree, right? Kirby Smart, Nick Saban guy, that you're going to be able to come in and replicate what Nick Saban had done. But clearly at Carolina and Tennessee, it went wrong. Clearly at Georgia, it's worked out well. But Kirby Smart being a former player there, and Georgia being a better football state than Alabama is. I think that's just what it is from a prospect standpoint. From Georgia Tech being irrelevant in college football in the last, I don't know, 15 years? A long time. Certainly 10. So I don't think that has anything to do with the mainstream media thing. And maybe I'm just being a little sensitive to that, having been a media nerd, media boy. Josh says, I'm curious. Shane Beamer's wife is in marketing. Does she help the image of Family Man? That's a curious statement there, Josh. I think every Family Man's wife has always helped the image of him being Family Man. This seemed to be a team for sure. I know Shane recently was asked, or it came up somehow, how he gets his wife's opinions and values those highly, as anyone who is a husband understands, I think. But when you're to that level, you got to go that much higher, right? You got to make sure. Like she was featured in the Beamer Family Foundation and the press conference the other day, combining with Richardson too. I just saw they were on. I think Shane was on Fox News yesterday. Trey Gowdy talking about that from that perspective, getting some national club there. So that sports mainstream media thing got me off on a tangent, got me a little sideways there. I wanted, in our main discussion today, now that we talked about Zavion Hardy, 4-star Georgia defensive lineman, adding to the class of 2023, making his verbal commitment just yesterday, making it now number 17 in the country, where Gamecock recruiting sits nationally. I think maybe up to number 16 if you're looking at different services and the whole thing. So right outside the top 15 where they have not been in 10, 12 years or so. Ahead of schedule. You got to give Shane Beamer a bunch of credit. And this is also part of the discussion right now. Roger says, I've thought in the past that bowl game wins weren't that important, but the one last year after just getting blown off the line of scrimmage by Clemson changed the mindset and has carried over. Trying not to blow it out of proportion, I think, is what a lot of us talking about Gamecock football have tried to figure out. But no doubt, man, I mean, compare that bowl game win with the Belk Bowl loss, getting shut out by Virginia. ACC opponents. Carolina was actually favored to win that Virginia game. They were underdogs against North Carolina. Clearly, there was carryover from that, or Muschamp was never really able to overcome, to bounce back from that thing, to get the program back going in a positive direction. Now, keeping it on an upward trajectory is the challenge for Shane Beamer and company. And also, with that comes this conversation about the expectation, right? If Anthony's expecting 8-4, that is a small margin of error to keep the program going in a positive direction. But I think it is August 22nd. I get that. It is important to be confident and optimistic about your team. It's a great way to live life. I appreciate that. So I'm guessing Anthony and others who might be saying 8-4 right now will reserve the right to, on early December, at the end of November, reserve the right to come back around on that and say, even if Carolina doesn't finish 8-4, I still feel positive about the direction of the program because X, Y, and Z. And Josh, I don't know how you were a Carolina fan and didn't 100% expect to lose to North Carolina in that bowl. 100%. 100% is true. Everyone I talked to before that game from the South Carolina perspective, absolutely in that game, having seen what they had seen. Knowing Sam Howell was playing quarterback that day for North Carolina. He could have very easily said, no, I got to get ready for the NFL draft. Could have done the Debo Samuel thing when Carolina played Virginia. But he didn't. And somehow it didn't work out well for North Carolina, and it worked out great for the game. Jason in as we get close to hour number 2 here. Good morning, sir. Glad to have you along. Really appreciate all you guys chiming in live chat-wise, YouTube, Facebook. Twitter doesn't, those comments don't pop in immediately right in the live stream. So if you want to get in the live chat during the show, 8 to 10 every weekday morning, Facebook or YouTube, definitely the easiest way to do it. That way we can pop your comment right in, keep the conversation going seamlessly. And the way that you guys are commenting here just in the last week, 10 days or so, I can feel it from you. It is very apparent. The excitement, the energy continues to up itself. That's a weird way to put that. Continues to climb. Probably the best way to put it. Chris says, so we've seen Beamer can coach up players, recruit some good players. Now we just have to wait and see if he can develop the talent to show up on the field, unlike Muschamp. Yeah, and I would say that is even, I don't think that responsibility or that credit will ultimately go to him. The credit will. The responsibility is his for sure, but that's where you've got to have really good assistant coaches who are good recruiters. Obviously, Jimmy Lindsay on the defensive line doing a heck of a job. Another 4-star guy yesterday. On the other side of the ball, doing a really good job as well. A bunch of highly touted offensive linemen, Greg Atkins, bringing those guys in. But now I always go back a But for some reason in my head, I always go to Les Miles when I think about this. Good recruiting not living up to consistently solid production on the field, and it was the wide receivers they had for so many years, and just not good offenses. Les Miles just didn't, and he got killed for it, and his time management at the end of the games had something to do with his reputation as well, even winning a national championship, right? But ultimately, he didn't win enough to match the big-time players that he had. And so the criticism outweighed the credit in that situation. And that's how good programs are, right? If you consistently bring in some of the best talent in the country, you're expected to be one of the best teams in the country every single year. And if you're not, it's really easy to point to coaching. Now, I always try to point out as well at the same time, those same coaches brought in those guys. But at LSU, you don't get the credit for recruiting that you do at other places. And I think South Carolina is one of those other places, only fairly so. Louisiana is a massive state. There is no in-state competition. Your rivals are also really, really good, and Texas is right beside you, but that also gives you maybe more fertile recruiting ground, too. Hope weighing in with a good morning. And Josh says, you're talking about Gauthier in the first game? I had to figure out who Colton was. It's got to be Gauthier. I don't even know what he is now, right? I'm assuming third string quarterback, but we don't know. We'll know more tomorrow. Shane Beamer, the first of his weekly press conferences as Carolina gets their weekly routine going 1 week ahead of schedule. So we're still 12 days away, right? This Saturday will not be kickoff. But Carolina going ahead and changing its schedule, basically moving from preseason camp to pregame mode. And no, I'll be shocked if I see Colton Gauthier play any kind of quarterback, any kind of meaningful snaps at quarterback. And Josh isn't thinking meaningful snaps anyway, so I guess what I'm saying is, do you think we blow Georgia State out? No, I don't. And again, try not to the other way, trying to keep that bowl game win in perspective. Let's be clear, if Carolina plays like they played the last time we saw them, yes, you'll see Colton Gauthier maybe get multiple drives. I think the odds of Carolina playing like we saw them last, not great in game number 1 against Georgia State. But who was that? Anthony Rose, the highly touted defensive back in his freshman season, putting it out on social media yesterday. The LED lights inside of Williams-Brice Stadium. It's gonna be something. It's gonna be jumping. Don't get me wrong. And I'm planning on being there on September 3rd, 7:30. I don't expect it to be a sellout in our 2022 college football environment, but whoever is there, and it's probably going to be 70,000 plus. Don't get me wrong. I just don't think it's going to be 76,000 packed to the gills kind of deal. Everybody who's going to be there is going to be fired up. And it's going to be a really good college football environment. These preseason lists continue to come out on social media. It was yesterday, was that the Boomer Sooner account, the Big Game Boomer, I think it might be, on Twitter, talking about tailgating tiers in college football, and South Carolina is on tier 1. And September 3rd is going to be a great day, assuming it's not 1,000 degrees, which it very well could be. And even if it is still, it will be a great day for college football fans in Columbia, South Carolina. Because college football is kicking off, man. The new season is upon us. And so there will be massive energy in the stadium. But then once the game kicks off, it's still the game, right? And you got to make some plays. And based off the entirety of that 2021 season. That's what I'm trying to project here moving forward. The entirety of it, not just off the last game, not just off the Florida game, not just off the Auburn game, but the other games too. And to me, that's just how my mind works. Roger, getting back into recruiting, looks like. Okay, he's breaking down some high school football for us. Wonder why Dorman didn't attempt to pass in the second half versus Greenville. I didn't even know who won that game. I assume Dorman did. He mentions one lineman's going to North Carolina and one going to South Carolina. I guess what he's saying is they just dominated the line of scrimmage, yeah? Makes sense to me. If you don't have to pass, don't do it. Who was talking about the pass defense? You should never brag about it. I forget where I saw that or who I was talking to that was talking about you shouldn't brag about your pass defense in college football because that means the other team could just run on you and you're basically saying it. Well, I think that was Brad Loyne who had told Chris Phillips that. I think that's how it was relayed to us in the program. There is that from last year as well, right? Carolina's still got to show it can stop the run and do it consistently. And now do it against a massively motivated team in Georgia State, a massively motivated head football coach in Sean Elliott, who at one time was the head football coach at the University of South Carolina on an interim basis. And certainly dreamed to be in the spot Shane Beamer is in. And has already taken his Georgia State program into a more historically successful venue program in the SEC and come out with a win when they beat Tennessee a couple of years ago. Already proven they can do it. So with all of that said, that's why Colton Goff, your comment from Josh, is so far away from anything that I'm thinking going into week number 1. Hey, wanted to give you guys a heads up. You see 11 o'clock today, Monty Lee going to be talking publicly for the first time since coming back to Carolina after being let go as the Clemson head baseball coach, joining Mark Kingston's staff. A developing note here, I think is the best way to put it. Today's press conference will be done via Zoom only because USC putting out not too long ago that Mark Kingston recently tested positive for COVID. So just out of an abundance of caution, today's press conference, which was going to be the in-person, old school, old-fashioned way, will now just be done like so many press conferences were done in the last couple of years, just on Zoom. But the Zoom call press conference will go on as originally scheduled for 11 o'clock this morning. So you're going to get plenty of Monty Lee reaction here in just a little bit. I am looking forward to this news segment. I try to stay away from the puns and then trying to be clever in the whole thing. It drives me nuts. If we're going to talk about mainstream media, I feel like they do it all the time. But here I go. Hills, peaks, and valleys. What I'm thinking I am most confident in, peak, and then least confident in for Gamecock football in 2022. I want you to think about what pops in your head first, and then, all right, after you have a little bit more to think about it, what are you most confident in and least confident in from a Gamecock football standpoint as we sit here on August 22nd, 2022? We'll get into that in just a second. Roger wanted to update us that Dorman won 53-28 over Greenville. He actually thinks Greenville's going to be a good 4A team. The Cavs just too much up front. A good sign for Gamecock fans and Marquis Anderson leading the way. One of the big reasons why Dorman's so good up front. All right, think about it. 2022, peaks and valleys. My last name is Hill. So clever. Most confident, least confident for Gamecock football in 2022. Going to get into that in just a second. Troy joining us, the resident Clemson fan, says late getting in, didn't get my birthday present. Brad Brownell, still our basketball coach. no one is feeling too bad for you, Troy, but happy 60th birthday nonetheless. Hope yesterday was an extra special day celebrating. Peaks and valleys coming up right now. Needed to tell you about one of our sponsors here on the program, Freedom Primary Care, who I trust to take care of my family right now. And the freedom part in their name really does say it all. You have the freedom to be in charge of your health. And it's a crazy concept to have to tell you about, but that's where we are. Naturally minded primary care, putting you in charge of your health is how they put it. And what it means to me is that when my family goes to visit Freedom Primary Care, located up in Fort Mill, not too far from where I am now, they can do telemedicine stuff too as well. So if you're not in the area, certainly still can take advantage of Freedom Primary Care and utilize them as your healthcare option, your primary healthcare option. But you have the freedom to make your choices here. You're not going to be pressured to go in a more traditional route or a more natural minded route. You're going to take in all the information that you are given, and then you will decide. You have the freedom to decide which way you take your health care, your route of care, if you will. That is so important to me and my family, and so appreciated right now for me and my family. It's why Freedom Primary Care is our choice. I recommend that you check them out and consider it, making it your choice as well. 803-627-2447. That's Freedom Primary Care in Fort Mill, South Carolina. All right, officially getting going as a high school football conversation has broken out on the live chat. North Augusta playing Dorman this week. They may hang 70 on us, Craig says. Yeah. And the early weeks of high school football in South Carolina can be that a lot. But Northwestern put up 89 on Rock Hill, I think. That might have been the big number in the state over the weekend. Just the fact that we got high school football, great sign, right? Love it. I know down in the low country, down in Charleston, a bunch of stuff got rained out. That wasn't pretty, but I think most of the teams across the state of South Carolina got in game number 1 in week 0, which of course makes no sense and should not even be allowed, but that's what it is. All right, hills, peaks, and valleys. Most confident at the peak. At the peak of your confidence, what do you put there? From a position standpoint, maybe a coaching standpoint, a program standpoint, and then at the valley, at the bottom of your confidence level, where are you? Let me go first. It's my last name that brought us this silly sounding or clever sounding segment. Depends on your point of view. Let's go positive first. How we try to lead. We're trying to find some joy here on the program. Peak, Gamecock, 2022 program. Program trajectory. To me, there is a very small chance that this program does not continue going in the positive direction, one way or another. It doesn't necessarily mean that Carolina is going to win 7, 8, 9 games in the regular season this year. What it does mean to me is that this year's team is going to be better. And if your team gets better from one year to the next, your program is headed in the right direction. Very simply to me. Right? You can have a bunch of other factors, but in year 2, under a head coach, that year 2 team should be better than the year 1 team. If it's not, it's a tough sell for me that your program is moving forward. And it was a massive step forward in year 1. Massive. That bowl game, again, trying to keep it in perspective, but it happened. 7 wins happened. And against 3 of them against real legit programs in Florida, Auburn, and North Carolina. So at the peak of my confidence for 2022, the program headed in the right direction. And Shane Beamer deserves all of this credit. All of it. Because when you're a head coach, you're going to get all the blame if it doesn't go that way. And South Carolina fans know exactly that, having seen the previous regime. So right now, Shane Beamer deserves all the credit. He's the one that has positioned this program in the unique way that he has. He's gotten that message out loud and clear, continues just over the weekend, right? Can you imagine Will Muschamp showing up to a preseason party on August 20th, 2 weeks ahead of the season opener? I imagine Will Muschamp being bunkered away, like with stacks of binders that have remember that defensive playbook that was released on social media not too long ago? And he just keeps adding pages, just writing plays, talking about overhang defenders to himself. Got the readers on, right? Switching back from the readers down as he's looking down at his play sheets, and then back to just clicking away, rewinding film and going back, and then breaking down, the minutia. Focused on the minutia, I think, is certainly a fair reputation that Will Muschamp earned as a head coach. Also, what made him a really good assistant coach, but the fact that Shane Beamer's out amongst the people, showing his appreciation for the people who want, need, and deserve it the most. The most ardent fans, the ones who want to celebrate Gamecock football and are so optimistic and enthusiastic and energetic about 2022. Well, that's what Shane Beamer was doing over the weekend. And well done. It's just the latest example of how he gets it. He understands how to be a head coach at the University of South Carolina and is doing it differently than anybody's ever done it before. And you have to in 2022. So that's where I am at the peak, big picture standpoint. DC, what popped in his head, most confident, he went position group specifically. He's most confident in the tight ends, least confident in the linebackers or the D line. He says it's a coin toss. Interesting. Tight ends on the positive side of things, not what I was thinking about. But I guess to me, because it very rarely I don't think I've ever heard this. Man, that's a good college football team. Yeah, have you seen their tight ends? Iowa has kind of been tight end recently. Carolina's had some good ones, don't get me wrong. But very rarely are they dynamic enough to make a significant difference one way or another in college football. And my kids right now, this reminds me of what my kids were saying yesterday. They're doing their second fantasy football draft this preseason. I'm going to regret that big time, by the way. 9-7, and they each have 2 fantasy football teams. Not wise parenting on my part. It's going to come back to haunt me, and I'm probably going to complain about it to you guys. So I'm just giving you the heads up on that. My apologies. It's all my own doing. No one else to blame but me. But I think it was the 9-year-old I was saying, like, yeah, tight ends, they don't throw to them very much in college. But they're really important in the NFL. It's basically the throw it to the tight end guy on Sports Talk Radio, right? I don't know why that is necessarily. Maybe because it's a really highly skilled and complicated position that we, from the outside as just fans, don't quite understand how difficult it can be to utilize and do it well. And these NFL staffs not only have the personnel to do it, the sophisticated personnel to comprehend and execute it, but also can work it into their schemes. And maybe that's just how it works. But yeah, and I know Georgia has really good tight ends, and they have for a while. But to me, it's usually an afterthought. Well, Missouri has had some good tight ends recently. I think Carolina's tight ends will be good. Don't get me wrong. Jaheim Bell leading the way. And if Carolina's tight ends aren't good, that's a really bad sign. Jaheim Bell has anywhere close to a game this season like he had in that bowl game, Carolina's going to win that game. I don't see him losing that game. And I guess I just don't see him. I don't classify him in my head as just a tight end. I think like H-back when I hear him. So old school highlights. I think it was an old school Kentucky Carolina game. They were both in the top 10, right? This was the Andre Woodson game back in maybe 08. Patrick DeMarco caught a touchdown in that game. This was just popped up on my social media feed, so I was watching it. Patrick DeMarco, I never thought of as a tight end at Carolina. H-back, fullback, kind of. Jaheim Bell, more of a tight end, but I think more of a DeMarco type than the traditional tight end. Austin Stogner, to me, is a Nick Muse type tight end. That's what I think of as tight end. Hayden Hurst, even though he was listed as a receiver at one point. Tight end guy. Go down the list, right? Tons of good tight ends have come through Carolina. So, tight end at the top, I get that, DC. I think you should be confident in the tight ends. How much that is going to impact this season, I think will be fascinating to see. Least confident in the linebackers or defensive line. Well, that goes back to, let me give you my valley then. Least confident, because I go going kind of big picture there with the peak, right? Most confident in that the program is going to continue in a positive trajectory. Least confident that the defense can be as strong as they were overall as they were in 2021. I guess the least confident stat maybe I have, if we're going to break it down to one stat or one specific thing, that South Carolina will lead the SEC in turnovers for the second straight year. The odds of that happening to me are the lowest. Clayton White deserves massive credit for what happened in 2021. I'm not trying to tell you that I don't think Clayton White is going to coach as well in 2022 as he did in 2021. I mean, second year of a program, you would think you have the opportunity to improve that much more, right? But from a turnover perspective, so many things just have to go your way. And I think you have the least control over a turnover, not even turnover margin, but turnovers forced. I think one of the reasons why South Carolina forced as many turnovers in 2021 as they did, give me a dramatic pause for a swig of water. Yeah, that's a swig from the south. That was more of a sip than a swig. New cup, still working on it. So I think one of, if not the main reason, if I had to explain it one reason, I would say overconfidence from opponents. They tried to do things they thought they could do against Clayton White's defense, and clearly they couldn't do it. Carolina made plays. You got to give them credit. But I think in year number 2, you're going to see, and I think it's very fair to say, this is I'm getting a lot of this, fairly or unfairly. Thank you, Anthony, for the dramatic pause. And I'm going, who does that irks me? Jim Rome, maybe in the most dramatic pauses. Just like that. It loses me a lot of times. So I'm going to talk mostly, I would think, faster. We'll try to avoid those as much as possible. My point is, fairly or unfairly, I'm judging this off of what we just saw with Travaris Robinson and Will Muschamp, who had a really, really proven and good track record on the defensive side of the ball. I know Travaris Robinson wasn't a coordinator and became that in name at Carolina. I think we all think that Will Muschamp was still very much the defensive coordinator for the Gamecocks. And it will continue to be one of the most mystifying things ever to see that defense just become completely unglued at the end of the Muschamp era. Just awful. Not good. Embarrassing a lot of times. So my explanation for that is, and it's not even my explanation, Matt Corral's explanation for why Lane Kiffin was chucking up his play sheet before he even threw the ball because he knew a touchdown was coming. Matt Corral, after that game, I think that was the last Will Muschamp game, wasn't it? We knew what they were doing before they did it. I think that was the quote. Exactly. Verbatim. We knew what they were going to do before they did it. So that defense had gotten to a point where it was very predictable. I think last year's defense for Carolina was the exact opposite. Offensive coordinators having not gone against Clayton White before. Thought they knew, but they didn't know. Thought they had a shot, took some chances, and they didn't work out. Clayton White was a chess move ahead. But sometimes Major League Baseball is always the best example of this. Sometimes when you are an unknown, you have early success, but then it's all about making the adjustment. Opposing pitchers learn about new hitters, right? Juan Grissom right now hit another home run yesterday. He's pretty much unknown. Major League pitchers, scouts getting information on him. They don't have a lot. And Grissom's making them pay for it. But there's going to be a period here, next couple of weeks, where there's going to be enough information and scouting reports are going to change or become more advanced. And it's going to be more difficult for Grissom. And he's going to have to adjust. Now, the great ones always make that next adjustment, right? And I'm not saying that Clayton White can't make that next adjustment. I'm saying the odds of him adjusting to the chess move that opposing offensive coordinators are going to make on them. I've been studying all offseason, have seen, broken it down play by play. Okay, here's what we did. What did they do? Here's what they did. What did we do? It didn't work. Why didn't it work? What are we going to do next time? That chess game, opposing offensive coordinators now have specific information they can use in this year's chess match. You got to be a chess master to anticipate what that move is going to be, make your move accordingly, and then force another turnover. And then the ball's still got to bounce your way, right? So that's why the Valley, for me, the least confident part of Gamecock football going into the 2022 season is that Carolina is going to lead the SEC in turnovers for a second straight year. Fascinated to continue to hear yours. Craig says, I'm most confident in Rattler. Wow. He's a proven 70% completion guy. We've never had that. Craig, you've never had anyone transfer into South Carolina football who was a preseason Heisman Trophy favorite the year before. So if I'm the exact opposite of Greg here. If I'm going peaks and valleys, the confidence in Spencer Rattler being a upper echelon SEC quarterback, I'm putting down in the valley. I just am. And it's not just him. There's so many other factors, right? Go with the coordinator factor, right? That's where I go first. What kind of offense is he coming out of? What kind of offense is he going into? Leaving one of the best, if not the best, offense in the country, coming to one of the worst. There's no other way to put that. That is not an opinion. Those are facts. Leaving one of the best, coming to one of the worst. And now being expected to bring up one of the worst in a big way. Now he's got more weapons. No doubt about it. It could happen. Greg, you're right. A proven 70% completion guy. But what I saw in that spring game from Spencer Rattler was pretty much checking everything down, throwing it 5 yards down the field. I think there was maybe 2 completions over 15 yards. I understand being a Gamecock fan, being confident or being optimistic about Juice Wells and Corey Rucker. Transfers in from James Madison, Arkansas State, but let's not pretend that these are proven Oklahoma-type wide receivers that Spencer Rattler had the luxury of. Now, I know he's talked very highly of him, and maybe they can be. Maybe they're going to be one of the best offenses in college football. I would have sat here last year and gone peaks and valleys going into 2021 and told you very confidently one of my absolute peaks headed into the 2021 season is that Josh Heupel in Tennessee is going to be ugly. And you can't just come into the SEC and throw the ball all over the place and think your offense that has worked at Central Florida is going to be able to move the football like you were there. They did better than that. I mean, they were massively impressive offensively last year. Unfortunately, Gamecock fans had to see it up close and personal a lot of times, especially that first half up in England State. I'm with you on your Valley, Craig. Now, again, never had a 70% completion type guy. Steve Tannehill, I think, was setting the bar from a completion standpoint back in the Brad Scott days. And it wasn't at 70%, but I think it was at 60 or maybe even a little bit higher. And at that point, that just wasn't what football was yet. So Carolina has had a guy leading the way and still putting up a bunch of numbers. But 70%, yeah, is a different deal. And that's kind of where it is in college football right now. That seems to be the ceiling. Greg says least confident is Valley offensive line. I have high hopes, but I got to see it first. And that's kind of where I'm coming from the Spencer Rattler standpoint. Talent level is there. So I get high hopes and being optimistic in the whole thing, but there is so much more to playing quarterback in college football than having talent. And Spencer Rattler has yet to show us that he can bounce back from the first major failure of his football career. And if you think that's too harsh, I get it. Say, hey, Caleb Williams is a really good player, and the last 15 games Spencer Rattler has started, his team hasn't lost. Fair. But I think it's also fair to say when you lose your job, you have failed in your objective as a football player to get on the field. So other plenty of examples, right? The Jalen Hurts example is the best one. Just because that happens doesn't preclude you from having success in the next place. No doubt about it. But Spencer Rattler's not transferring from Alabama to Oklahoma. Lincoln Riley, Marcus Satterfield is not Lincoln Riley. So that one would go on the opposite end of the spectrum for me. The confidence in Spencer Rattler to be an upper echelon quarterback, to be a 70% completion guy. And no one's going to be happy. Craig understands this probably the best. If Spencer Rattler is a 70% completion guy and goes, 8 for 12 would be 75%. Even if you double that, right? You go 16 for 24. Actually, that would be 67%. My bad. 9 for 12. A little slow today. He goes 9 for 12. That's 75%. You double that, you go, and then you take a little bit away. If I doubled that, it'd be 18 for 24. Let's see. You're 17 for 24, right around 70%. You go 17 for 24 for 120 yards, no touchdowns, and the offense didn't do anything. But you complete a bunch of passes, and you say, oh, we put guys in position to make plays, and they just couldn't quite break those tackles and make those moves, and the blocking just wasn't what it was, and you couldn't throw downfield because the protection wasn't quite there. That's where I'm with you on that offensive line thing, man. Went back and finished the second episode of Welcome Home popped up in my DVR. I got the YouTube TV, so I just DVR'd that show the first time around. Got cut off at the end where it was Javon Gwynn and Eric Douglas in the training room talking about their last go-round on the offensive line. Again, second year under Greg Atkins, second year under Marcus Satterfield. Played a lot of snaps together. But they were talking about how important it is for their position to play well. They know it. But I think a lot of Gamecock fans, Greg, are right there with you in a lot of ways. Based on what you've seen, what we have all seen in the last several years. There has been continuity. I think very rarely, I'm trying to think, very rarely have you seen integral guys go down and that be an obvious explanation for why the offensive line wasn't playing well. Last year, the explanation was a communication deal, and it wasn't all the offensive line's fault. Right? That's what I got. It's easy to criticize the offensive line. It wasn't always their fault. Okay. 1 year you can do that. Year one, you can get away with that to some degree. If Marcus Satterfield and company hadn't have gone up and down the field against North Carolina, I don't think he could have gotten away with that and kept his job. I just think that's where it was headed, unfortunately for him. Now, being back for a second year, Greg Atkins, as mentioned earlier in the show, seems to have done a great job recruiting-wise, getting big-time prospects in. The depth, this is where you couldn't ask for more depth. I know earlier, forget who popped it up, but said the depth is just not there to expect more than 8 wins. From a big picture standpoint going into the season for South Carolina football, absolutely agree. Where you could probably make the argument that the depth is there is on the offensive line, where you have almost all the starters back, right, outside of a semi-regular starter last year in Justin Turnentime. Then you have those backups back too. So and then you add in a couple of talented freshmen who you can groom for the future, which is exactly how you want to run your program. Only the most talented unicorn-esque offensive linemen should get on the field early in their career. And maybe that's going to be Marquis Anderson, the second highest rated offensive lineman recruited at Carolina from up at Dorman right now. Only Brandon Shell coming in with a higher recruiting profile on the offensive line in Carolina history. Maybe that'll be him. But to have other guys able to bulk up while being a scout team offensive lineman, while sitting in the meeting room watching everything that's going on that goes into adjustments that you got to make. That's exactly how you want it. But South Carolina's offensive line hasn't even been average the last few years from an SEC standpoint. It just hasn't. So that does go into, Greg, what you're talking about Spencer Rattler. So I don't quite get that. How can you have a lot of confidence in your quarterback and very little confidence in your offensive line? Because they're so married together in so many ways. Roger going a little outside the box, not going most confident or least confident here. He's going with a request, liking to see Dakereon Joyner used somewhat like he was in the bowl game. Got to find a way to get him more touches. He's exciting to watch. That's another fascinating part of the 2022 season, isn't it? How will the MVP of your bowl game be used? Because when you got a guy like Spencer Rattler, it was really telling one time, and I think this was a Dakereon Joyner thing. I don't think it was another guy showing me age, or I read an article on The Athletic yesterday. Drink if you're playing that drinking game. On Geezers of College Football, I forget who writes it for them, but this is the second year in a row talking about older players. And for the first time ever, last year there was an 8-year senior. There's another 8-year senior this year. Incredible, right? So I'm trying to think about this. I mean, DeCarron Joyner, I think, is in year 5 at the least, and maybe year 6, because I think it was talking about him being a red zone type of wildcat option. And it was when I know Will Muschamp gave this line. He's like, yeah, but you got to understand if you're doing that, then you're taking the ball out of Jake Bentley's hands as well. So if you're putting DeCarron Joyner in at quarterback, you're taking the ball out of Spencer Rattler's hands. What you're saying is that he's a better option than Rattler. Last year during the bowl game, I think we all understand being the best option at that time. He was alternating snaps with Zeb Nolan. Again, Zeb Nolan is going to be a South Carolina legend, but was never a preseason Heisman Trophy candidate favorite. So it is going to be so fascinating to see how your bowl game MVP gets utilized, because we just haven't heard a lot other than we heard DeCarron Joyner himself say that it seems like the plan will be to do kind of what he did in that bowl game. Well, that's going to be quite a trick. Now all these defensive coordinators saw what happened in the bowl game. They do have to prepare for it, but they should be much more prepared for it than North Carolina was. Greg says, I just think we have at least 4 to 5 more weapons than we did last year. Legette's been really good in camp, according to insiders. We had Bell last year, and Van, that was it. So you're talking about confidence that Rattler's going to be legit. Gotcha, man. And I agree. There's no doubt about it. You do have more weapons. But to what level? Josh Van and Jaheim Bell proved last year that they are legit SEC weapons. Are they getting talked about this year as being top of the food chain? Certainly not. Van is not from the outside looking in from a wide receiver standpoint. Jaheim Bell is getting some preseason love and is unique across the SEC, no doubt about it. So I would say you got Bell and then you got Van from a totem pole standpoint. Bell on top, Van still very much has to prove himself as an NFL caliber guy. As he certainly separated himself last year and proved that he was the number one target and a number one SEC receiver, typically an NFL guy, right? But we've seen South Carolina receivers, Shi Smith most recently, I think he ended up being a second-round pick, if I'm not mistaken, maybe a little later than that. Alshon Jeffrey was a second-round pick. Sidney Rice was a second-round pick. For some reason, that has been kind of the theme for Carolina receivers recently. I think we would all agree that Van's not quite to that level. Brian Edwards, I think another second-round pick. And Greg, I understand where you're coming from here. Xavier Legette got on the field as a freshman, seemed like he was going to be the next in line, but we haven't seen that on the field yet. I think you got to put him in the category of any kind of hearing that the offensive line's looking really good in camp, according to insiders. At least that's where I put it. And more than that, to me, this goes into a confidence level that you have in the Gamecocks offense. And that I put maybe right next to the defense leading the SEC in turnovers. And that's at the bottom for me. Unproven, I think, is a very kind way to talk about the Gamecock offense in general as a whole going into 2022. I get it, man. The Marshawn Lloyd story is tremendous. And if you're absolutely convinced he's going to be a frontline guy, one of the SEC's best, good for you. I admire your optimism, energy, enthusiasm. That's fantastic. I don't know if I've seen a guy who seems to deserve it more at the running back position for Carolina than Marshawn Lloyd does for multiple reasons, right? Battling back from injury, the way he's handled the public eye coming from Delaware to begin with, realizing how special the program is, talking about how special the program is, all of that stuff. He hasn't shown it on the field in college football going into year number 3. Marcus Satterfield came to Carolina. I think it's fair to give him a Muschamp-esque resume, right? Plenty of reasons to not be excited about him being named Shane Beamer's first offensive coordinator, especially considering how those conversations go for Gamecock fans and major college programs out there, right? You see other guys, like Kendall Briles or Rhett Lashley, fill in the blank out there, right? In college football, who seem to be the next thing, the next big thing. Usually it's a young coordinator, right? Having success at a program that traditionally hasn't had success. Why don't you go after that guy for South Carolina? The Gamecocks really haven't had an awesome offensive coordinator they can get really excited about in a long, long time. I mean, Steve Spurrier was the guy. He's the last guy. Certainly it wasn't any of Muschamp's guys. Mike Bobo, no, wasn't that guy. He came in with a bunch of Georgia baggage. And it's very fair to say, based on year number 1, that Marcus Satterfield has a lot to prove. He'll tell you. I mean, he told Spencer Rattler, right? People think I stink. Think you stink. Let's prove them wrong. That is a great story headed into 2022. But for me, we're talking about confidence I have that story is going to be rewritten. That's down at the bottom. Roger is on the other side. He says, I'm confident in Rattler as a premier quarterback. I'd like to see our run defense improve. Hopefully, we hold our own more than last year. Well, Carolina's going to have to hold their own more than last year if the defense is going to improve. The run defense especially. It wasn't very good last year, Roger. Chris says, also on the opposite end of me, I'm confident our offense will be much better this year. Less confident in our secondary only because there's not much depth there. And I would tell you, there is more proven depth going into this year than there was last year. Jalen Foster this time last year, nobody was talking about him positively. We couldn't. He was a walk-on that was kind of forced onto the field and was on the receiving end of a lot of other teams' highlights headed into last season. And then became an All-American all of a sudden. Cam Smith, Carolina didn't have a proven defensive back going into last year. You had to get a guy from, Assumption College, Garland Platel, to get in there and get significant minutes. You are hopeful that a talented player in Cam Smith out of Westwood High School All-American, could develop into a legit corner. Marcellus Dial as well. There were Darius Rush. Yeah, throw him in there, Greg. All those guys completely unproven this time last year. And again, this is where you got to give Clayton White a ton of credit. But you're right. From a depth standpoint, there's not much depth there, Chris. Absolutely. Outside, and Shane Beamer said it 9 days ago after the first scrimmage. They pretty much got their first 5 guys. It's after that, they got to figure out where they're going to go in the defensive secondary. Greg was talking about the scar tissue for sure. Well, there's scar tissue, and then there is the sense of being realistic, right? I think those are two things, two different things. You can be a Gamecock fan and acknowledge what has happened, and I think have pushed past that scar tissue, worked through that scar tissue maybe last year, and now say, oh man, so excited for this season. But I think you can still be very excited for the 2022 season and yet reasonable about the final record numbers. I mean, 9-3. If you don't acknowledge that's unreasonable, I got a hard time having that conversation. I got a hard time figuring that out. 9-3. Again, all those games that I put in the middle earlier, if we're breaking this schedule down into 3 different segments, probably going to lose, probably going to win in toss-ups. I think it's pretty easy as we sit here right now. Still double-digit days away from starting the season that you got 4 games you should probably win. You got 4 games you should probably lose, and there are 4 toss-ups in the middle. Arkansas, Texas A&M, Georgia, and Clemson. Probably going to lose. National standpoint, right? Think about the national perspective on those games. South Carolina's probably going to lose those games. The 4 games you're probably going to win. Vanderbilt, Georgia State, the 2 other non-conference games in South Carolina State, and Charlotte. Now, the ones in the middle, I don't see how you can move those into probably going to win, especially Tennessee, especially Kentucky. Haven't beaten them, didn't beat them last year. Kentucky haven't beaten them in a while. Missouri lost to them last year. And then Florida is the other. Beat them last year. I get it. That one was great. Now, if you want to move all 4 of those games into the probably going to win, I think that's being a little bit too optimistic. And then maybe you steal another of those games that you should probably lose. Okay, I get it. Craig says 7-5 is a really good year, in my opinion. I would disagree with that. I'd say it's a good year. It's not a really good year. But again, it will be, all right, what does that 7-5 look like? Yeah, you go win a bowl game and get to 8, okay. But we all saw Will Muschamp's second year where Carolina got to 9 wins. And it was a good year. I think as you continue to look at it, a really good year. It might be overstating that, and that was a 9-4 record, right? Again, Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, Missouri. They're not going to be top 15 teams this year. Top 25, I think, is a stretch for several of those. I get it. Some Tennessee projections are way up there right now. Kentucky, if you really want to project up there as well, okay. But no one's telling you that Missouri is going to be one of the best teams in college football this year. No one's saying that Florida in year 1 under Billy Napier is going to instantly bounce right back. So I think that's when we get into the semantics, right? Chris says, I'm a big Gamecock fan, but I know how to be realistic about how good and bad we are. I got that trait from being a Cowboys fan. Oh, good for you, kid. All right, more peaks and valleys from my perspective. Let's go back to the peak. Right, so Shane Beamer and the program's trajectory. Again, and a lot of that, Craig, the 7-5 is a really good year. Just the fact that you can say that as a Gamecock fan is an example to me. Is one of the reasons why I have that confidence in the trajectory continuing in that direction. But also knowing that last year's 6 losses, some of those are really, really ugly. And I think that gap will get narrower. It will not be as uncompetitive in some of those losses as it was last year. And then that gives you a chance to actually maybe pull out some wins, maybe pull out an upset or 2 more. And then it's off the charts, right? And then it's rocket ship trajectory. If Carolina goes from 7 wins in year 1 to 9 wins, even to 8 wins in year 2, I think it's clear signal that things are headed in a real positive direction, real quick for Shane Beamer. Because this is a battle for number 2 in the East right now, isn't it? This is what we're talking about. That's the next step for South Carolina football right now. The first step for Shane Beamer was legitimacy. He had to become a legit head coach in college football, and he had to get South Carolina back to a place out of the basement in the SEC, maybe even out of just one half step above Vanderbilt. And he did it in year number one. I get it. You're going to say, well, Carolina did barely beat Vandy last year. No doubt. So the margin for error is still pretty thin, pretty small. But he got the win against Florida and Auburn, and you can't do that if you're in the basement in the SEC East. So that was step one. Check. Now step two is to get Carolina. I think right now, every Carolina fan would say, and I'm trying to think of those other programs too. There are a bunch of other programs here, right? Kentucky leading the way. They're the preseason pick to be number 2 in the SEC East. Tennessee, I think, fair at number 3. Florida and Carolina, I think Gamecock fans, you want to fight that Florida should not be ranked ahead of South Carolina in the preseason SEC East standings. I get that. I don't disagree with you. I think that's a helmet thing. It's a tradition thing, by and large. But also knowing what the Florida program has been and knowing that Billy Napier is a good college football coach. I get it. But now that's the next step. The first step, it was difficult, I think, in a lot of ways, especially with the quarterback situation last year. To get to legitimacy, difficult. More difficult now. Step number 2, getting to second in the SEC East. Because we all know right now, the gap between second and first is a pretty massive gap. But the gap between 6 and 2, the separation between 2 and 6 in the SEC East, it's real small, isn't it? Missouri and Kentucky, Kentucky and Tennessee, and Carolina. So that's why, traditionally, I would never say that would be the second step for a South Carolina football coach. You got to get all the way up to number 2 in the SEC East. But right now, with Tennessee, also a second-year head coach. With Florida, a first-year head coach. With Missouri being Missouri and having a much lower ceiling, I think, than most other SEC football programs. And with Kentucky also having a lower ceiling. I think it's very fair to say. That's why that's the next major step for Shane Beamer and company. And you can make it in year number 2. It's definitely not it's definitely within the realm of possibility, I should say. You can make it in year 2. And if you don't make it in year 2, getting there in year 3 and year 4 almost becomes a necessity to move the program forward. Because if you do it this year, then you can solidify the program. And Steve Spurrier showed us you get a lot of positive momentum in South Carolina when you can beat those traditional big boys every year. When that becomes a habit. When it happens, it did become a habit for Carolina. Go back to that 2010 season, right? Who did Carolina beat that year? Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida, I think. It can happen. It has happened. And this year is a great opportunity to make a massive jump. Also, the fact that it isn't expected. It would be a tremendous boost and a tremendous step for Shane Beamer and company to get here. They'll be way ahead of schedule, but it can happen. A good quote from Mike Ayers, former Washington coach, said, "A coat of paint a difference between 2 and 6 in the East." It's a great way to put it, Roger. So will Carolina get there? They're going to have a lot of things go right. They definitely can do that, I think. But that's where this year's schedule, I don't think, does the Gamecocks many favors. The SEC schedule I'm talking about specifically. At Arkansas and then Georgia. Then getting the confidence back, you would assume, against South Carolina State and Charlotte. But then it's the gauntlet. It's what's going to determine the success of the season by and large. Unless you pull a win off even at Arkansas, obviously against Georgia. You set yourself up for a really good season already. Got to beat Georgia State to start. But that's also really the fun part of this season, because I can see us. I think maybe I was talking to Chris Phillips about it. We're going to know a lot about Carolina's season 3 games in. We are. But knowing how these things go, I think we could definitely say if South Carolina gets a relatively solid win in week 1 and then plays Arkansas very competitively, but doesn't win that game, and then doesn't win against Georgia, but again, it's relatively competitive, then I can see us say, yeah, we're not quite sure, looking at other teams, where Carolina fits in with Kentucky and Florida and Missouri and Tennessee. And then you can't really project, even 3 weeks in for this schedule, how the rest of the season is going to play out. Makes it so fun to talk about, doesn't it? Made me had to get another swig of water there. So maybe you can put a little bit more thought into it. Your peaks and valley, your peak and valley right now. If you just had to choose one, what would you go with? Most confident, least confident in. Not even a couple of weeks anymore. 12 days away from Gamecock football practice. Or Gamecock football season. They don't have to say practice anymore. Love it. And now there is no practice today, as I understand it. I think 2 straight off days, as Carolina will now get into a game week routine. Weekly press conference from Shane Beamer coming up tomorrow. Yep, Chris, and this is, in a lot of ways, this is the hardest part. Tired of talking about it, just want the season to start. This week, in a lot of ways, can be the hardest week. It's still not quite there. Still got more than a week out. But it's so close. So instead of looking at it like that way, Chris, just try to go the glass half full. We're that much closer. It is right there, man. It is right around the corner. And enjoy that. To me, the older I get, the more you got to enjoy this time of the year across college football or whatever season you're going into, right? Undefeated. Everything is still out there. The dream season is still possible. Spencer Rattler has not thrown a single incompletion in his Carolina career. Still 15-0 in his last 15 games he started. All right. Roger's going to have another cup of coffee, he says. Y'all have a great day out there. He's peacing out. DC is done for the day as well. Appreciate you guys, all the feedback. 11 a.m. today. Again, another reminder, Monty Lee will have a press conference. Going to do it via Zoom because Mark Kingston recently tested positive for COVID, so not an in-person deal, but still public comments, and going to be fascinated to hear what Monty has to say, because we've never seen this before. Clemson baseball coach fired, Carolina hires him as an assistant, where he's been an assistant before, under the now athletics director, who is the current head coach's boss, who hired him, and it hadn't been working out great for a handful of years. Didn't work out great for Marcel Ozuna, back in the starting lineup yesterday for the Braves, booed in Atlanta after getting arrested for DUI over the weekend, or I guess maybe early Friday morning. Atlanta just missing out on the sweep against the Astros. They're 4 games back in the Mets as this week starts. That Saturday night game was fantastic. Extra innings. You're a traditionalist. You don't like sending a runner out to second base in extra innings. I get it, man. I think that means you don't like the idea of it more than the reality, because the reality was it didn't look like that game was ever going to end otherwise. And we got a bunch of runs, ninth inning on, and it made things really exciting. Worked out well for the Braves, as things tend to have here recently. 4 games back now. Josh is out with a later. Anthony, great show today. Tim with a thumbs up. Thank you, Anthony. Tris says y'all have a good one today with the Gamecocks. Tonester with a good show. You guys help make it a good show. Appreciate you starting the week with us. We'll get more guests worked in as we move throughout the week, as we get even closer and closer to football season. Try to maintain your patience and your optimism. I know it's going to be difficult. It will be difficult for all of us, but we can all go through it together. Thanks for going through this together. If you can, like, subscribe, retweet, and all of that stuff. Comment. You know how it works. Thanks for being a part of the program. Streaming live every morning, 8 to 10 here. Tim Hill, unrestricted free agent.